So they were going to originally launch in the beginning, January of 2009. And then a few days before, they said, something's complicated. We can't launch it. It'll be the following week. And then that happened 2 or 3 times. I said, Lydia, is this really going to happen? And she said, Bob, we have more people trying to put KenKen in the New York Times than we have covering the war in Afghanistan.
All right. Well, today we are meeting with Robert Fuhrer of KenKen puzzle fame. He's got such a rich background in the toy and game industry. It was such a joy for the three of us to chat with him today and just kind of hear from his years of experience in the industry, traveling to Japan, and learning more from all of those experiences. Nate and Joseph, what were some of your takeaways?
Well, for me, I thought kind of going into this, I knew that he wasn't a developer himself, but being able to sort of spot opportunities and put himself in a position to collaborate, find the right people to work with and find the right ideas. He just had a knack for kind of picking that out of the thousands of opportunities that he had in front of him. So I really had a ton of respect for Robert's, curative abilities.
Yeah, he has lots of stories that he shared and some philosophies along the way. He talked about freedom being currency, which came early in the conversation. I was like, ooh, it's not just games here. And then at the end, he had one where he goes, I'm glad I didn't know you couldn't do it. And I think that cap over the top of most of the stories as you're listening helps you get a sense of how he went about the opportunities that were in front of him. So really enjoyed our conversation.
And now to the chat with Robert. Today we're thrilled to speak with Robert Fuhrer, who helped bring KenKen puzzles to market after a trip to Japan in 2007. Robert has been involved in games since he was a kid, and in 2019 was named as one of the top 100 most influential figures in toy and game design. He also founded Nextoy, a company that focuses on developing and distributing educational and recreational toys, puzzles, and games. He's known for creating toys like Gator Golf and Crocodile Dentist and other games licensed to Mattel, Goliath, Hasbro, and Spin Master. Thanks for being here, Robert.
It's a pleasure. Nice to meet you guys.
Good to meet you too. Robert, you've won numerous awards in the toy and game industry, and you've had the opportunity to work on some really big board games in a past life. I'm wondering, what got you interested in the industry in the first place?
So when I was a kid, my dad was a salesman for Matchbox cars. That was his first job in the toy business. He came from book publishing, actually. So when I was, I don't know, I guess 10, 12 years old, he was already, with Matchbox. It was owned by a British company. Later on, he went on to work at Estes Rockets, which you may know, and a few companies that no longer exist, a kite company, handicraft company, and so on. So I got, introduced to the toy industry, from that time on. And my first job coming out of school was right for an agent, a toy agent. So, in fact, the first toy idea that I ever had was accidental. Was when he was at Estes Rockets. Yeah, I think you guys know Estes Rockets, right? The model rocketry. It's like a hobby, and I wasn't much into them personally, but he was there, and he came home one day. I was about 15 years old, I guess, 16, and he said, "We're trying to appeal to younger children, so we're coming up with this line of products. So if you can think of anything, for a younger person," and then I have kind of a corny sense of humor. And I said, why don't you design a rocket like a foot and call it the mistletoe? And wouldn't you know it, they did. so, so, so they came out with this product. I think it sold about 7 pieces. It was nothing. I've been trying to track it down on eBay for years and years, and maybe it doesn't even exist. I have artwork somewhere buried in my archives for it, but that was the first idea that I guess I ever had that made it to a market, even though I didn't do much on it.
That's awesome to get that kind of an experience at a young age. There's certainly, I think one of the things that we keep seeing is such an opportunity for kids to get involved in creating games and learning about entrepreneurship from an early age. Were there other experiences that just working with your dad in that capacity that kind of set you on this path?
Well, I didn't really work with him. He was in the industry, so we got the trade magazines were coming to the house, and you get familiar with things. And then my first job out of school was so he knew the agent for the game Othello, and I was hired as the product manager for the person for the small company that were at the time were the agents for the game Othello. So I was made the project manager for that. I worked at that for about 4 years, and that was probably the most important time because Othello came from Japan originally, and part of my job was being assigned to work directly with the Japanese, and they sent somebody to the U.S. to kind of learn the U.S. market, and my job was to be his friend. So I did that. He was a few years older, and I learned, to work with the Japanese at that time. And the reason that's so important is a lot of our company history, the Nextoy history, is really steeped in Japanese relationships. And we worked very closely with one of the Japanese companies for about 27 years, where I worked with them to develop a lot of products together. You had mentioned earlier Crocodile Dentist and Gator Golf, but there were many others as well. That really jump-started my career in toys and games. Those are more typical toys and games like tabletop, plastic, skill, and action. Then we went into radio control cars and a lot of other fields. And I'm still doing the same thing. I find a lot of joy in it. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy that part of. I don't even consider it work. It's just like something that I do. I would say it's become second nature necessarily because there's always surprises, but it's part of, it's like just part of my life because it's been like that since 1977. So it's a lot of years doing that.
That's a wild story. So with the game Othello, did you have any idea of the success that it might have? Like what, could you talk a little bit about that experience?
Well, it was already successful when I was hired. I think it came over in 75 and I was hired in 77. It had been shopped around to a bunch of different toy companies who all turned it down because strategy games, didn't sell or whatever the conventional wisdom was at the time. And then I went to a company named Gabriel Industries. They were eventually gobbled up by CBS Toys and I think then Hasbro. But so it was already established. And part of my job was they were running these, they had an international federation. They're running these international tournaments, KenKen, Othello tournaments internationally. And I was a referee and just basically, person that was sent on all the errands to do everything. What's the word for the Johnny something? Do everything. Johnny do everything, or Bob do everything, and it was actually exciting because right off the bat I was associated with a a global product, a global game that had success. And I was able to meet people from all the different toy companies that had the Othello rights in their respective countries. And then ultimately, after 4 years, when I went out on my own and started Nextoy in 1981, I already had these relationships because of that, and especially the relationship in Japan, which doesn't happen overnight. You really have to nurture that relationship, even to this day. It just requires patience and persistence and an understanding of the Japanese culture, so which I try to do. Well, in Japan, so what I've learned is that when we're dealing with like Western nations like Germany or France, England, Italy, etc., and they're working in the United States, there's a real common understanding on how to do business. You don't need anybody in between. But even China, to a large degree, and Chinese work well with the Americans, but the Japanese culture and the Western cultures are so different. I mean, as a simple example, we're taught in the United States and probably elsewhere, from a very early age, we're taught to give a very firm handshake. You give a firm handshake, look them in the eye. And in Japan, they're bowing, they're not touching. So we're starting completely, physically different. And then the mentality, so there's a saying in Japan, which translates to English as, the nail that stands up must be hammered down. So they want more teamwork and less individuality. And the U.S., we go by, stand up and be counted, or the squeaky wheel gets the grease, things like that. So there's a big difference to begin with. I also think that there's everybody values human relationships, but I think that's a very intricate, integral part of the Japanese business etiquette of when they're dealing. They want to know, they want to get drunk with you. They want to have dinner with you. They want to talk about things other than business. What are your hobbies? What do you like to do? And get a really better understanding of the person. While a lot of times business relationships are just that, like, I have something that you want and let's make a deal. But in Japan also, so I don't mean to keep just running on this, but in Japan also, it's team decisions. So it's not an individual decision. So actually to get anything done, it takes a long time and it takes patience. And it's hard to have the patience for a lot of times. I find it challenging too, but I've learned how to deal with it. But I've been molded that way by my Japanese colleagues. So
molded.
Yes.
They make good ceramics in the west of the country too, so you must have been molded well. Cool. Well, thank you for that.
Actually, one of the reasons I started working with them is I was so young that they did feel like they could train me how to deal with them. It was expressed to me that way, actually. So there's a lot of truth to it.
Sure.
My experience, yeah.
I was recently there.
Oh, nice.
Walking across the street, it was like you'd have to queue up, right? And everybody was standing about 6 feet from each other. I got off the train and was like, well, okay, if you're not going to walk to the front, I will. And it became really clear to me that that's not what you do there. I should have stood in the back.
There's roles.
Times, 3 or 4 experiences like that every day. So thanks for sharing a little bit about that.
It could be midnight on a completely empty street, and if the don't walk light is on, you don't walk. You don't cross the road. Even there's no traffic. But
if you have a reserve seat on a train, sit in the reserve seat. Someone's going to come and check on you.
I was going to say, it is rigid like that. I've been on airplanes, on Japan Airlines, different airlines, where maybe there's empty seats and you want to change your seat. And no, that's your seat. so there's a lot of rules. There are a lot of rules, for sure.
Kind of like games.
Oh, there you go. Nice. Yes. Yeah, I think, Japan, I don't know, the game culture, I am not too well versed in it. Of course, like games like Go, some strategy games are quite popular there. But I think in the U.S., a lot of the games, at least my world, was like skill and action, mechanical, like immediate gratification, boom, 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 do something really fast. The other big difference, like Japanese toys to American toys, and I think it's shifting as the world's getting smaller, and we have the internet, and you see what other cultures are doing. So some of what I'm saying maybe is a little bit dated, but there was a lot of watch me toys. We call watch me toys. You wind something up, and it has this like wonderful mechanism. The thing will like hop 3 times, do a somersault, then jump up in the air or something like that. And you just marvel at the mechanism, but none of the U.S. toy companies were interested in that. They just call it a watch me toy. There was no interaction from the child to make it happen other than winding it up. But you'd see a lot of these things in Japan, very, very unique mechanisms. So what we tried to do is play with those mechanisms and apply them into a game or a toy.
It makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of interesting things that happen, especially in the late 70s, and having to deal with international communication partnerships. Really, really kind of a arduous process, I'm sure. Do you feel like some of those lessons that you learned in working that way, like helped you launch your next company? Because 4 years later, you launched Nextoy. Is that right? Was that?
Yeah.
And so you had a lot of those relationships in place. I'm kind of curious, like, was that always a plan of yours to do that? Was to go out on your own?
I always had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit growing up. I had various little businesses to make cash in the summer and stuff like that. And I don't think I was really good working for somebody. Obviously I did it for 4 years and I learned from it. And I think I was a good employee, but it wasn't something that I was driven to. I was more driven to be independent and kind of control my own destiny. And for whatever reason, I think even as a young kid, I was not a good student. I never liked being told what to do, even to this day. I don't want to have my wife to hear that, but no, she knows it. but it's just like a personality trait. And I say that, some people, like, they think they want to be an entrepreneur, and you go like, well, what's your motivation? And I feel like if it's just to make money, that's not the right motivation. The motivation is, at least for me and for other entrepreneurs that I know, it's really just to be independent. And, the financial, obviously the financial stuff's important, but it's not what, the driving force. It's sort of a result of what you're doing. If you're doing it well, you get lucky. And I feel like luck plays a lot of role too. Of course, you have to create your luck, but I've been lucky with my relationships, and it's a philosophy anyhow. To be free. I actually tell my kids, so I have 3 kids, and I've told them their whole life, and they all It's great. They all have great work ethics. They all have kind of an entrepreneurial spirit to themselves. And usually you'd think that comes from, growing up with some hard knocks, which, thankfully they didn't. But I've always told them that freedom is a currency. It's, money is a currency, but freedom is. And as you get older, you get less and less freedom. And, because you end up with relationships and maybe children and jobs and so on. And it gets squeezed. Then you get to my age and it starts opening up again. But when the kids are out on their own. But I think that's really important to understand that it's not all about, making money, just personal philosophy. It's important, because you want to have a certain lifestyle, but I don't like it being the driving force.
When you first launched Nextoy, what was a catalyst? Like what was the first thing that you did? Did you invent something? Did you?
I had an idea for something. I had an idea. So another philosophy I've shared, and I always had it with people who worked for me, was we're kind of trained in the U.S. Of 4-year cycles. 4 years of high school, 4 years of college. A lot of 4-year cycles in our lives. And whenever I hired somebody, not that there weren't exceptions, there were exceptions to this rule, of course, but generally, give me 4 years, right? And I had worked 4 years as the project manager for Othello, and it was becoming obvious. It was on not only my side, but my employer's side, that was probably good time to move on. So I knew I was going to go into my own business. I just didn't have any idea like what it would evolve to. But I didn't have any obligations. I wasn't married. I didn't have any girlfriend. I had an idea for a game that was going to need some time to develop with a friend. And we did. We developed the game. It actually ended up coming out several years later. It was sort of a memory game called Locomotion, and it was sold by a now defunct company named Shopper. You may remember the Cooties, very classic toy Cooties, and that was by this company named Shopper, SCHAPER, not like you're shopping. And it was acquired by Milton Bradley, and they sold it for a few years. And, as a lot of these things, you have these dreams when you create a game that it's going to be something huge, and it isn't. So that's sort of the norm, but the process is fun, and that jump started. But the key was about a year. So this was in September of 1981. Actually, I always like saying my official start date of my business in the paperwork was 9/9/81, which is a square root day, and they only come once a decade. So, and I like the 18s, the 9 and the 99, the 81s, the 18s, the whole thing. I like number stuff. Aside from KenKen, that's just a coincidence. And I started the business in September of 81. And then in July of 82, I was in New York. My dad was working in Boston for a corporation. He was the liaison to the Estes Rockets that I mentioned earlier, the kite company. When I had mentioned earlier, I was assigned to be the friend of this guy from Japan, who was working for the Othello, the company that brought Othello to the market in Japan. And he moved to New York, and they said, be his friend, find him a place to live, and go out for drinks with him, and so on. And that guy was ultimately recalled back to Japan. And in Japan, he got a call from another company. And in those days, so this is 1982, Of course, it's way pre-internet and pre-cell phone. And when I started, I was working with telex machines. I don't even know if you know what that is. It predates the fax machine. And communications, let's just say, weren't as easy as doing a video call. So he went back to Japan, and another Japanese company guy called him up and said he's just been assigned to run this international division of his company. He knows, the name of the guy was Kono, the one who had lived in the States, and he asked Kono to introduce him to people in the U.S. because he was going to make a trip. And interestingly, Kono wanted to show off and thought I was too young, and gave him my dad's contact and information because he was an executive. And Tak Shimakata was the person's name who had made the query, and he came to New York. And my dad's office was in Boston, but by fate, my dad was in New York that day. And he called him up, and his secretary hooked him up and wanted to meet my father to pitch him something. My dad asked if I can join the meeting. I didn't have that much going on. And it was a dinner, and I joined the dinner, and I saw right away so my dad was working with Estes Rockets and this kite company, and Tak Shimakata was showing him like vehicles, a completely different category and not an appropriate category for the company. They weren't going to do a vehicle business. So I just piped up and said, this has to go to this company, that company. It should go to Tonka or Remco, whatever the vehicle companies were in those days. And the focus of the conversation shifted more to me. He, in a funny way, asked my dad for permission to take me out the next night. Very, very formal, like asking the hand in marriage. So the next night I went to dinner with him, with Shimakata, and he said, can you really get this product to the companies you mentioned yesterday? I said, yes. I sensed an opportunity. He said to me that his company, which is a big Japanese company, would never understand him, that he would ask me to do that. So this has got to be between he and I. And if there is some success, then he'll find a way to reward me. And so he gave me these samples of these toys, and he left to go to Europe. And I had a dozen of them. It was a product. The company had gone bankrupt, and they had already developed this, so there was some production pieces of it. And I took them and I just sent them out to a bunch of different toy companies, these things. And wouldn't you know it, I got a bite. And a company by the name of Ertl, ERTL, no longer in existence too. I put all these companies out of business, maybe. So Ertl, this guy, Jack Stoneman, I remember his name, called me up and said they were working on a vehicle just like it, except that this one was done and it didn't use batteries, and the one they had used batteries. And I didn't even know how to make the business deal, to tell you the truth. I was like, well, this is exciting. And I scrambled. Somehow I got a hold of Shimakata, and they made a deal. And it was maybe beginner's luck. And one of the rewards they provided to me was a trip to Japan, my first trip in December of 1982. First of probably 130 or 140 over the following years. So I went to Japan December 1982. And they gave me another project there. And this one didn't come to market, but we got down the road with one of the toy companies. And they, it just grew very slowly. And I got introduced to the company. It wasn't a secret anymore. I wasn't being hidden like you having an affair. It finally came out, and there you go. And I worked with this group for 27 years. In fact, to this day, sadly, Mr. Shimakata tragically died from a brain aneurysm in 1996. It was unexpected, but one of the senior people reporting to him had taken on a leadership role, and saying to this day, I still work with him. And 40 years later, more than 40 years later.
So 140 trips over 40 years. It's like 5 trips a year.
I took, it was about for 30 something years. Yeah, I would average at least minimum 4 times a year. I'd go to I was going to Asia, Japan, for up until actually, weirdly, I haven't been since COVID. So the last time I was in Asia was in January of 2020 when we didn't know about COVID, but I was in China at the time. But my last trip to Japan was in 2019, June of 2019. So it's strange going, 4 times a year for all those years, from 1983 to 2019. It's a lot of trips. And a couple of times I went like 6 times in the year, where there was a project. And the trips were very short. Many of them were very short. Arrive on a Monday and be home on a Friday.
Yeah, and you got to handle that time zone. For me, coming back is rough. It takes me a couple days.
The key is sleeping on the airplane. You got to sleep on the plane.
Oh, right.
So
and so in all of those trips, you came across a bunch of games.
Well, most of them were being developed. So I had very talented people working, for me, with me in the U.S. And then what was great about this Japanese group was that they didn't want to be like the personality to talk to the companies and do all the follow up, and they were interested in making business outside of Japan. So I really had very little to do what they were doing in Japan. And they had this overseas operation, OOTD, Overseas Operation Toy Division, and I had pretty much free reign of that, and they would show us mechanisms and drawings. I don't know if I said thousands, it's probably true. Never counted them of concepts and of ideas, and. You whittle them down to survival of the fittest. You see what our customers want. We pitch them. Looking back, I'm like, I really think we should have done more. But there's so many factors that control things. First of all, you have to have a customer that wants the product, and so many products end up going down the road and then dying for some reason or another, or even coming out on the market after 2 years and flopping for whatever reason. So we're fortunate enough that, I've had a few good successes over the years, but it's really out of a kind of a huge library of ideas of some very interesting ideas. I go back, so I still have a lot of these archives, and I do go through them once in a while to see. But I end up donating many of them to there's a toy museum in Rochester, New York, the Museum of Play, Strong Museum, and they actually have a lot of a lot of my stuff now.
Hey guys, we got to spend the weekend in Rochester, New York. It reminds me of the wallpaper store in Soho. Have you been there? He's got all of the posters, this big through space, and it's posters from forever ago, right? And just amazing.
I love that.
But that's what happened in my brain when you were talking about mechanisms and operations, sketches from decades ago.
We have renderings, some really hysterical ones, because nobody comes up with ideas like the Japanese. I mean, some of these ideas are just like hysterical. You know, one of my favorites was My Dog Can Talk. It was basically a collar with a speaker, and then at the end of a leash, you'd talk into it, but it would sound like it was coming out of the dog. but never got made.
That's funny. This morning I was talking as if I was the dog, and my daughter went, "That's not what she sounds like." And I went, "How do you know?"
I get it. You have to do a little Scooby-Doo imitation. But yeah, there's some really, really crazy ideas come out of Japan. And it's really been fun and interesting working with the Japanese all these years.
Just on that topic, you've seen thousands of games. Just in your mind, what makes a great game?
Oh, I'm not sure I'm a good person for that. So we look at games not for the gameplay necessarily, but more for like a marketing hook or a marketing feature or what we could sell to a toy company. So my business is like product placement of ideas. So a lot of times certain products may be great in how they play and the rules and depth of it, but they may not be the kind of thing that you can pitch and sell. It'd be something they'd rather develop internally, or what they look for from the toy inventing community. So we're considered part of this fraternity of toy inventors, toy and game inventors. And what they look for, our customers being like Hasbro, Mattel, Spin Master, Goliath, the big toy companies, something that's very mass market and they can promote, and in 10 seconds, the target buyer goes, "I love that." So it's not necessarily about the rules or the gameplay. It's more feature driven, the kind of things that we do. In that case, so many elements have to come together, because you have the industrial design, the theming. So one game that we're very famous for, and it's really just a lot of great things came together. It wasn't really planned. Is Crocodile Dentist, and I give so much credit to the industrial designer and Milton Bradley, who's the company that took it at the time, because he's the one that came up with the design of the crocodile and the way it looked originally, and it was so charming. It just as easily could have been a dinosaur, could have been I think we presented it as a crocodile, but a lot of times these toy companies will change the theme, and make it into a dog, they'll make it into a dinosaur, a shark, or whatever. But he kept the crocodile, and somehow his design of it and the color of it, and it's changed over the years, but he put it together in such a way that it was just a cocktail of good decisions came together, and it sells it 30 something years later. It's still selling. It's considered a classic in our industry. Gator Golf. Do you know Gator Golf? The game Gator Golf?
I've not played it myself.
Okay, so it's been around since the early 90s. It's a putting machine in the shape of a alligator. And the way it came about Um, I mean, you asked me what makes a good game, and I'm kind of going into like what, how do we approach games and how do we sell them? So it's a little bit different answer for your question. But at the time, Crocodile Dentist succeeded. There was a game called Shark Attack that was on the market, and it was a shark that marched around a board and it was trying to like eat characters that were, you roll a dice and they were running away. And it was a huge success. It was probably like 1990 and 1991. And then Crocodile Dentist came out, tabletop. In that version, you pull the teeth, and then one of the teeth would snap the jaw closed. And then we were trying to figure out in our office, how do you extend that? Like, what do you do to get Crocodile Dentist? Like, I know you can make it smaller. I know you can change the color. But how do you merchandise it and get another game out of it? And couldn't think of anything. We were really stumped. I came to Toy Fair, and Milton Bradley's introducing a spin-off of Shark Attack, and they called it Shark Attack Bowling. You probably never heard of it because it was a failed product, but I thought it was brilliant merchandising, personally. So they had a shark, it was like the bowling ball, and then they had fish as the pins, and you'd rev up this shark and you'd aim it at the pins and would knock them down. And I immediately said, it's sports. We got to do Crocodile Dentist with a sport. And we rendered up a bunch of different sports. I think, tennis and baseball. I don't remember anymore all the sports, but I had the drawing someplace. And one of them was golf. And it just seemed the most natural because of miniature golf. And so that one, the survival of the fittest, that's the one that emerged. And went into the Milton Bradley line, pitched as Crocodile Dentist Golf. Then Shark Attack Bowling failed, like right off the bat. 2 months in, 3 months in, they pulled the plug. They may have sold a few of them. And because of that, they made up their mind that sports iterations of these popular games, they don't sell. Suddenly it becomes a rule. So they were going to kill Crocodile Dentist Golf because the Shark Attack Bowling didn't sell. And luckily, the designer, the same guy that crafted the crocodile, he was assigned to the Crocodile Dentist Golf game. He kept at it, and he pitched it in a meeting, and they loved it, and they just changed the branding from Crocodile Dentist to an alligator, from a crocodile to an alligator, and it became Gator Golf. And it's one of the best-selling games. We call preschool games in that category. It's a floor game, but to this day, it's one of the best-selling games in the country. I was going to say the world, but the truth is it doesn't sell so well overseas, but in the U.S. it sells great.
What a wild story. Thanks for sharing that. That's the perseverance of that designer, also pretty interesting. I'm sure there's a lot there.
His name is Phil Grant. I'll give him a shout out. He's a bit older now and long retired, but he was critical guy.
If I understand the story, it sounds like you were on one of these business trips to Japan, and you were introduced maybe by a business colleague to what is now KenKen. And I'm curious to hear if you could just describe kind of the first moment you played with Kashikoko Naro Puzzle. Hopefully I said that right.
Kashikoko Naro Puzzle. So I'd been going to Japan all those, dozens and dozens, 100 times, already, and you meet people. And there was one particular guy at a Japanese book publisher. So book publishing, just by its nature, is very language-based. And they had a little toy division, and we flirted with some things over time, some educational toys. very tiny successes. A couple of things happened, but the guy that ran that division, I really liked him. He was a great personality, warm and friendly and outgoing. And whenever I went to Japan, I was always trying to find, a coffee, a lunch, a dinner, sometime, you'd be there and just to catch up. It's the human relationship thing that I'll circle back to that I mentioned earlier. So told him I was coming over to Japan. This was April of 2007. They were just returning from the Bologna Book Fair, which is the largest children's book fair in the world. And so actually, I was already in Japan, and they were just coming back. So my meeting with them was towards the end of my trip. So I went over to the office. His name's Tak Kubadera. And immediately, he's a very charming guy, and he said, hey, Bob-san, we have this game, and it uses numbers, so there's no language. And so we showed it in Bologna to a bunch of companies, and there's a lot of excitement. It was, keep in mind, this was on the heels of Sudoku coming to market in the U.S., already for a year or two, and meteoric rise to popularity. And so he brought out a book of this KenKen puzzles, and you asked my immediate reaction. Well, my eyes glazed over, completely glazed over. I'm not really a puzzle person, and I hadn't done Sudoku. I was aware of it because it was so popular, and it looked like a Sudoku clone. And we always prided ourselves on being innovative and original. And I didn't really want to be like a Me Too kind of product. And then I saw like addition signs and subtraction signs and division signs, like the operators. And if you look at KenKen, it's got it's got thick lines and thin lines. And like right off the bat, it's very, I always say it's very visually intimidating, KenKen. Like you look at it and you have to be a certain kind of person that embraces it. I'm not that person. And I looked at this thing. He showed me this book, and I was like, forget it. And he was telling, look, we introduced this book in June of 2006. This was now April of 2007. And in that 10-month period, they sold 1.3 million of the books, which was an extraordinarily high number for a book of this type. And he goes, it's got depth, it's got scale, it's for all ages, it's, what I've been preaching over the years, it's gender free. So it's male or female, it's any age, and it's language free. So technically everybody in the world is your potential customer. And that didn't escape me. Because I had a friend from the toy business that made an enormous success selling candy. And after candy, this is very funny, he made a bigger success selling toothbrushes. It's great to go from candy to toothbrushes, but he made the first electric $5 electric toothbrush, and he sold it to Procter & Gamble as the Crest electric toothbrush for let's say a nice amount. He's still a good friend. And he had always said to me what appealed to him were products that weren't restricted by gender or age or language. And candy and toothbrushes were among those. So I had that in the back of my head, even though the product and they were just telling me, how great it was, this, that. And then my, not so brilliant comment was, Tak it was Toxon. This could be the greatest product in the world, but if nobody's ever heard of it, it doesn't mean anything. And his immediate response was, well, how do people hear of it? And I said, because knowing Sudoku, I said, well, it has to be in the newspaper. And he said, oh, Bob, please put it in the newspaper. And it was kind of funny. And I was just thinking to myself, oh, God. But I knew I could get to Will Shortz. So Will Shortz is the New York Times puzzle editor. He lived near me. He had just gotten more popularity because he was the subject of a documentary called Wordplay about the crossword puzzle business. As he runs the crossword puzzle for the New York Times. And I have friends, of course, in the puzzle and toy world and the toy business. And I was just thinking, really, to stop this sales pitch about KenKen, I was like, all right, I think I can show it to somebody at the New York Times. So it was really like a throwaway line, but I meant I'd try to get a hold of Will Shortz. And funny enough, there was a woman working for Kubadera. Her name was Nikki. Her name is Nikki. And she said, oh, I already sent it to the New York Times. I never heard from them. I was like, well, of course, you can't just send these things cold, and expect to get an answer. So they loaded me up with a bunch of the books in Japanese, even though it's not language, of course, the title and the rules and everything's in Japanese. And I had an English rule sheet, which made a few copies. As it turned out, I was on this trip to Japan with two colleagues from two different toy companies that I was bringing around to my different colleagues in Japan to see new ideas. And I gave the KenKen to each of them. They were presidents of their own companies, their respective companies, and they both loved it. Like right after, I hadn't even played it yet, and I gave it to them, and they were like, this is great. And that year or the year prior, this is before apps. So there was a handheld Sudoku, like a handheld game, an electronic game, almost like a calculator, but it was dedicated Sudoku. Sold some crazy number, like 50 million of them, or some number like that. I don't remember the exact number. So they both said, "Oh, we want the handheld rights to this." So that was like the first inkling that something. Then I went back to the U.S. and I wrote an email. I called my friend Mark. I said, Will Shortz, right? Yeah. I said, can you introduce me? So he goes, well, just send him an email. Here's his email address, and just tell him I referred you. So I sent him an email saying, hey, I live near you. And Will tells the story. The most appealing thing that I wrote in my letter was, I won't take more than 5 minutes of your time. So I guess I wrote that. I said, give me 5 minutes. I want to show you this thing. So I thought I'd be going down to the New York Times. I'm in my head. I'm Will Shortz, the New York Times. I'm going to go to the New York Times and show him. So he goes, well, you say you live in Chappaqua, as a town. He was in the town next. He goes, come over to my house at 11 o'clock on Tuesday. So I went over there, and he answered the door in like shorts and a T-shirt, and I'm thinking, it's the New York Times. You're going to be in a suit. So I went in. I had this Japanese book, or these books. I'm trying to explain, like, I have a little bit of success and history and toys and games. He couldn't care less, to tell you the truth. And I said, let me show you. And I'd learned how to play the game at this point. Let me show you how to play this game. And he was like, if it has to be explained to me and I can't learn on my own, it's forget it. Just leave it. I left. And 3 days later, I get an email from Will saying, hey, Bob, you came the other day and, you left this book and had 105 puzzles in it. And I couldn't put it down. I finished the first 103. The last two were a little too hard, but I'll get to them. But what I really don't understand is how a puzzle of this quality I never heard of. And, because he gets pitched everything. And before you do anything, come back. And now I was greeted a little, a little more openly, and we had a nice conversation. And I didn't even know, I didn't have any rights to it, to tell you the truth. I didn't know. And I thought it was going to be a book business, and I'll be the agent for the books, and I find a book publisher and whatever. I didn't know. And the name, as you said, was Kashikako Narrow Puzzle. But one of the Japanese editors called it KenKen Blocks. And they had like a category of kind of logic games and things. And they all have different names with sort of, Western names. And this one was called KenKen Blocks. The reason it was called KenKen Blocks was Ken means wisdom in Japanese. So KenKen was wisdom squared. And I just called it intuitively KenKen. Just, it was easy to say, easy to spell and whatever. I thought actually it was a little too trite and kind of simple sounding, but I didn't want to be like a doku. I wanted to stay away from like the doku thing because, as I said earlier, I didn't want to be a copy of Sudoku. I wanted it to be its own thing. So I just called it KenKen, and which is what the Japanese were doing, KenKen Blocks. And he said, look, he goes, whether I'm involved with this or not, I think it's a great puzzle. He goes, the New York Times, I've been trying to push them for years to do another puzzle other than the crossword, and they won't hear of it, but I'm happy to set you up with the New York Times to have a meeting. I said, sure, great. So he did that, and a little more intricacy to the story, but that's basically the essence of it. And I went to the New York Times, and I showed it, and, they seemed a little bit intrigued, but at the end they said, we're not going to add a puzzle. And I kept in contact with Will a little bit, and he thought that if they were ever going to add a puzzle, it was going to be to the Sunday magazine, the last page, and never in the newspaper because it was too big an undertaking. Actually, the opposite happened, but I'll get to that in a second. So, in the meantime, I didn't know what the deal would be, and I pitched something to Will about how it'd be structured, and he rightly thought at the time that if it was going to happen in the U.S., it was going to be because of his name and presence, and I just couldn't find the right formula to involve the Japanese creator, the Japanese publisher, myself, and Will. What everybody's expectations were the math wasn't working. So I kind of just slept on it. I had it. I knew at this point it was a special product because Will Shortz had given it his Good Housekeeping seal of approval. It was Will Shortz seal of approval. The people that I exposed it to thought it was fantastic, who were into Sudoku and into puzzles. So I kind of knew I had something. And but I didn't know I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make the business deal on it, candidly. And I just thought it wasn't going to happen. Years before, I'm sorry to jump around like this, but it's important. I was working on a chess project with Hasbro, and it required programming. And the person at Hasbro said, if this is ever going to see the light of day, you need to work with the father of computer chess. His name is David Levy, and he lives in the UK. Here's his number. If you can get him involved with it, then this has a possibility of moving forward with us. So I got a hold of David Levy. The project got down the road, but ultimately was killed. 5 years pass, 6 years pass. Now KenKen, I have KenKen. But I'm thinking of this chess thing again. I think maybe I'm going to revive it. And I called David Levy up and I said, I'm thinking of reviving the chess thing. And he says, well, I wrote a book. He was an artificial intelligence expert before AI is on everybody's lips now. So this is back in 2007. And he said, I wrote a book about, and my publisher is HarperCollins in England, and they think I should be on the Colbert Report, a television show that you have in the States, named the Colbert Report for Stephen Colbert. So they're flying me into New York, and I'm coming in next week, and my only free night is the night I get there. Why don't you come for dinner? We'll talk about it. So I go into the city with my wife, and we go to dinner. And this is in October of 2007. And we start eating dinner, and his phone rings. And I am talking. He hangs up, and he goes, they just called a writer's strike. So my appearance on the Colbert Report is being postponed until that's finished. Then he says, it's just as well I have to get back to England to run the World Sudoku Championships. So I said, well, hold on for a minute. What are you talking about? So David is a chess expert, and he actually officiated Bobby Fischer matches, and Deep Blue and IBM had their machine against, I think it was Kasparov, and the first time, and he was a referee or some official during it, and he was tagged by the Times of England, who started Sudoku. They were the first newspaper to publish Sudoku, and they asked him to run Sudoku tournaments because he was in that world. So I said, what do you have to do with Sudoku? And he mentioned, and I said, well, I have this Sudoku-like product that I found, da-da-da-da-da. Come back the next night. And the big fun part of this story is the name of the book that he wrote, that he was going to be in the Colbert Report, and he subsequently was, and I urge you to look this up, to Google this. It was called Sex and Love with Robots, and how between artificial intelligence and conversational software and robotic technology that people are going to fall in love and marry and have sex with robots, which is happening. And David wrote a book about it. And Stephen Colbert interviewed him several months later, and it's a very entertaining 5 or 6 minutes, I'll tell you that much. So anyhow, he went back. I met him. I showed him the game. He flew back to England. He contacted me and said, this puzzle is fantastic. And as it turns out, Times UK are looking for a successor to Sudoku. And would I be able to pitch this to them? I said, by all means. So he went into the Times. He pitched it to them. They were very poker-faced, but they showed interest. and they kept on saying, give me an answer, but never got the answer, never got the answer, never got the answer. And finally, there's a British toy fair every year. It takes place in London in January. So I said, tell them I'm coming to the British Toy Fair. See if you can set up a meeting at the Times in London, Times UK, which he did. And I went with my daughter, who was 10 at the time, went in and couldn't believe it. They said, we're launching KenKen on Easter Sunday. I think it was March 22nd that year of 2008. And they had a 14-page supplement of KenKen puzzles, 14 pages supplement. And they had it all prepped and ready to go and the whole thing. And I'm in this, in this meeting, and it really caught by surprise. I didn't know the decision had been made. And that was very exciting. And I hadn't been in touch. So I came home, and I hadn't been in touch with Will at all since the summer before. I called him up and I said, the Times UK is doing it. And the next day I got a call from the Times going, did you tell Will Shortz we're doing this? And I was like, uh-oh. They said, this is a secret. I got my hand slapped. But a week before it launched, I'm pretty sure it was March 22nd. I have the day wrong, but a week before it launched in the UK, I got a phone call from Macmillan Publishing in New York, St. Martin's Press, who run all of the New York Times crossword and puzzle books. And the woman on the phone, named Lisa Sense, said, Will Shortz says you have a property that we must have. So went down. We made a 10-book deal with them. I hadn't even launched yet. It didn't do well. One thing I kind of neglected here, or I skipped over, was the rights for it. So what happened was that the Japanese company, so this guy Takubadera I mentioned earlier, I told him we were generating some interest, but didn't know where it was going to go, and it was going to take a kind of a significant investment. Because we had to build a Kenerator. I call it a Kenerator because you can't make enough KenKens by hand, and there's intellectual property and things like this. And he said, "Can you guarantee success? Can you guarantee this thing will be a success?" No, there's no way to guarantee anything, but it's going to need investment. So he said that his company would never invest on speculation on this. And there's no way he could get a budget, which we were estimating is $200,000 to build the Kenerator, do the intellectual property and the continual development and everything like that. And I had I felt like I had an opportunity in my schedule, in my life and whatever. So I said, well, I'll do it, but it means that I'm going to end up owning it because trademark is going to be in my name. I'll pay for it all, and we'll work out something. And he gave it his blessing. We figured out an arrangement, which we still have to this day. It did take over a year to get that contract done because there's a lot of people weighing in on it, but that's how I came to own KenKen. Is I called my lawyer up from his bar at this hotel in New York, and I said, "Can you register the name KenKen for?" And we picked 3 categories: computer play and print and whatever the categories were. the class is 16, 41, and 9, I think it was, or something. And and then over the course of time, we expanded that to like basically all over the world, even though we didn't have any business. And for a long time, I thought I made maybe a foolish expenditure because we like registered in China, we registered in South America, we registered every place, and there's a lot of, depending on the country, there's a lot of fees, there's renewal fees, there's maintenance fees, there's all these fees. And we didn't have business in a lot of these places. It was really mostly in the U.S. it started, but when you know it, about 5 years ago, Will introduced me to the guy who brought Sudoku to China, and the Chinese government basically appropriated it from him after it became so successful, and he was looking for something else, and now he's my partner in KenKen China, and he's doing a fantastic job with it. And it was really because we had strong trademark protection. This decision I'd made 10 years prior or 8 years prior that we hadn't had any return on, finally had a return. And it's happened like that. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. I was used to dealing, as we spoke before, tabletop plastics, mechanisms, batteries, all kinds of things. And KenKen is largely a digital product. A year after we launched, so we launched in the Times UK in March of 2008. Then, literally watching my son play lacrosse, I was speaking to one of his friend's mothers, who was a lawyer for Reader's Digest. They were in our town. And I asked her to set me up at Reader's Digest. And I went in there and I pitched KenKen, and they said, "Can Will Shortz's name be on it?" And I said, "Yes." I figured I'd ask him later. And they said, "Okay, we'll do it." And he was fine with that. I didn't even know how to make the deal. It was whatever. It was a modest deal, but they came out with it. And I suddenly just decided to build this KenKen website, KenKen.com website, with no game on it, just like information and rules. And because it was in Reader's Digest, we were getting about, 250 visitors a day or something on a good day. And then I went back to the New York Times, and we had built this player that would generate the puzzles for the newspaper. So you can't make them by hand. There's too many of them. So we built this. And in the middle of it, I said to the developer, actually David Levy was overseeing it, I said, "Can this be an interactive player as well?" And he said, "Sure, for another, X amount of money, do it." So they built that. So I had the Kenerator, we still call it the Kenerator, which would generate KenKen of all different sizes and challenges and skills and operations. And it was also a player. So I went back to the New York Times, who didn't want it in the newspaper, and I said, "Would you put this on your website, because it doesn't take up any real estate, it's just a game." And they weren't in the games business like they are today. And they went, "Okay, we'll give it a try." And then luckily I said something like, "All right, you have 60 days to make a decision if you want it in print, and you can have exclusive print rights for a year, or for there was some restriction to it, but something like that." And the Times UK had already come out with it. And like a month in, they said, "All right, we want the print rights." And I was like, wow, great. So they were going to originally launch in the beginning of January of 2009, like the first Monday. And then a few days before, they said, something's complicated. We can't launch it. It'll be the following week. And then that happened 2 or 3 times. And finally, I was dealing with a woman, Lydia Reynolds there. I said, Lydia, is this really going to happen? And she said, seriously, it sounds like a joke, but she said, seriously, she said, Bob, we have more people trying to put KenKen in the New York Times than we have covering the war in Afghanistan. And finally, on February 9th, 2009, the New York Times put it in print. And my little website, which we didn't even have a game on, we had 250 visitors a day on a good day. I had 35,000 visits that day. And I don't know, easily 1,000 emails. Like, what is this? How do you play it? Or a million questions, mostly similar. And I answered every one of them. Ultimately, I was working by myself, really, and sat at the kitchen table. World turned upside down, and creating, template responses. So I'm not typing each letter individually. Mostly, it was the same letter I was sending to everybody, but I was trying to feed it. And that's how KenKen started in the New York Times. And this is before apps. So I thought it'd be a book guy. And then that year, or 2008, I got contacted by Capcom, a big mobile game company. They had Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and some other games. And they called and they asked for the KenKen rights. And after the Times UK, so I made that deal, and expired after 3 years. And then we decided we'd build it ourselves, which we did. So we do our own self-publishing now. We have our own app. We run the website. These things are requiring constant changes. It's actually, we haven't updated it in many years, but we're investing a lot into a huge overhaul, which we're about a year behind on, but it'll happen soon. And that's kind of the KenKen story. So
that's a fascinating journey, Robert. Thanks for sharing that with us. Super curious from a business perspective. It seems like when you were getting started out that maybe you thought of yourself almost as a book agent, and that was maybe how you thought you'd get paid. But it seems like there's quite a diverse set of revenue streams that have built up here over time. You've got the digital licensing rights to the digital game publishers. You've got the publishing rights to newspapers, publishing rights to book publishers. Certainly done more direct book publishing yourself now. And you've got the direct website income and maybe some other direct game income. And I'm curious, what percentage of revenue are you seeing from some of those different sources? Is there one that really stands out as being the primary driver of revenue?
It's a good question. So when I first started it, not that I know so much more now, but I really didn't know anything then. And I just built it. Okay. And we had a lot of players, and we had no revenue model, no business model. And I figured we'll figure that out later. Let's just get the players. And that's sort of what happened. Then I brought in a guy I grew up with, actually, who was a business, at the Harvard Business School. He'd run big companies, and he kind of straightened out my mess and tried to make it a business. So our primary income is digital advertising. So there's a lot of digital ads, both. So there are several income, products. So we do self-publishing. We also do licensed publishing. We don't do so much of that anymore. It started that way, but it's mostly our own books for the people who want to solve in pencil and paper. Then we have a app which we control, and it's Android and Apple, and it's about to get a major overhaul. Been working on it for quite a while. It's got a very straightforward income model. We're going to enhance that a bit with, maybe some kind of token model and some other things that you see in a lot of mobile games. I want to help the experience. I don't want to ruin the experience. So it's requiring a lot of tweaking. Then we have a syndication model with newspapers, and that's actually how we got most awareness. I said it before, it's visually intimidating. It's sort of like the riding the bicycle analogy. Once you learn how to do KenKen, you go, oh my God, it's like that's the system and it's easy. But when you see it, it looks a lot harder than it is. And I've had so many reactions over the years of when I show people how to play it, and they go, that's all it is. They thought it was much more complex. It isn't. The different income streams. So the franchises are mostly tournaments. They run tournaments. They just held a huge one in Egypt and in India. And they get, and the UAE is the Ministry of Education basically endorsed us in the UAE. So in the US, a lot of people have heard of KenKen, but a lot of people haven't. In the UAE, it's almost like a household word because the Ministry of Education endorsed it, and it's in all the schools as a supplemental math product. And it's growing very fast in India and Egypt right now, and some other countries. And we get frequent inquiries. In Africa, we had in Uganda, of all places, a partnership, but we're price shifting it to a bigger company in Africa, and that's but it's digital ads. I personally am not in love with it. I don't like swamping people with a lot of advertisements. I think we can do a better job the way we do it, but
you and my son Robert, he really doesn't like that we put ads in the games that we create. So
it's kind of a necessary evil, to keep. We have a big education following, and we give that away for free. So we have 42,000 teachers that educators, not all teachers, but educators that receive free weekly KenKen sets every Friday. So if any educators are watching this and they want it, just go to KenKenPuzzle.com and select find the teacher page. And there's a way to sign up there. I couldn't tell you how to navigate to it unless I looked at it, but it should be easy.
So it sounds like you've got a lot of joint ventures and indirect partnerships. And if we look back in those early days, you were kind of as one person answering 1,000 emails in a day at your kitchen table. But I'm curious today, what does your team look like, and who's on the team?
So our team, we have the same developer since day one. He's located in Croatia. He is an employee of ours now. For many years, he was moonlighting. I have a young man in New York City that handles the customer service, the customer care. People write in saying we made a mistake in the puzzle. For the record, there's never been a mistake, or all kinds of things. Most of them are technical issues. They paid for something and they don't see it. Maybe they didn't log in. There's a lot of reasons. So he works, and David Levy still generates our puzzles for all the newspapers and our website and so on. Although this young man is also starting to supplement that and support that effort. And then I have a partner, Jerry March, who basically runs the company, and he's really the business. he's the operations and knows how to make it into a business. I think I'm more of the face of it, maybe a marketing idea person about it. I'm the dreamer. I've been called a dreamer, so not always complimentary in a complimentary way, but I'm like I have the dreams of what it should be. Maybe I've lost a little bit of that energy, getting a little comfortable with it, but we are ready, maybe to go to a next stage. I'm fighting whether it should be a new parent for that or ourselves. I don't know, but I think there's a huge opportunity. We're like really well known and maybe one of the most successful games of this type, but I think we're only a small percentage of what it can be with the right thinking and investment on it. So I still think the best is yet to come anyway.
I'll ask one for, aspiring game developers or designers out there who are looking to build their games or have the entrepreneurial spirit, if you will. Do you have any advice for them?
I see it a lot of times. A lot of creative people don't want to deal with the business aspect of things, or they don't know how, or they don't have the confidence to do it. So if you feel that way, maybe don't be afraid to collaborate with somebody that will complement your skills. And I know, like, for myself, I've always done better when I've had where I'm able to just do business development. The business school term is business development, but it's basically the dreaming and going out there and trying to find new things, and then have somebody behind me to execute that and do it. And KenKen, I have my partner Jerry, who does a great job with it. With my toy business for years, I had Taksha Makata, who I had met accidentally, and then I just had great people working for me over the years to help, to follow up. So I would say don't be afraid to collaborate. I guess that would be the biggest. I think a lot of people don't want to do it. They're scared, or they don't know, the other party. And I think there is some validity to that. You got to be careful who you partner with, because there are a lot of horror stories with that. But it takes a lot of different components to make a successful business. And it's very rare one person can do it all.
I will absolutely say yes if I'm assigned to be a friend of a Japanese person or, anybody else in the country, because it sounds like your adventure in business came from being assigned a friend.
That's right.
Which is lovely. My question would be, it would be like a game developer's guilty pleasure when you play someone else's game. Do you have any game that you would assign me to play?
So I've always liked deductive logic, which is interesting because KenKen is sort of in that field. So I always like Stratego and Mastermind, even like Battleships, even on a simple level like Guess Who. Do you know that game, Guess Who? So
the little flippy cards.
Yeah. It's invented by an Israeli. That's a great story on its own. Actually, the father who died, just passed a couple of years ago, was a classmate of Anne Frank's, and
oh wow,
the husband and wife created that and many other fantastic games out of Israel. Their sons now run the business and have their own particular successes. My middle son, who works for the company, works for us. He's a real gamer, and I know he's gotten very much into like Magic the Gathering, and I mean, he just loves all kinds of games. He's just like really buried in it. He just knows games. He knows what's commercial, what's not. He'd be in a lot of ways a better person to ask. I look at games strictly from, almost like a commercial standpoint, whether it's something I see so many games. So, I get turned on if they have like a clever mechanism or some, either gameplay mechanism or physical mechanism. And what I mean by gameplay mechanism, like, I would have loved to have come up with the game Twister at the time, which is like a completely new way to play. Even to this day, there's hardly things like it. Games like Bop It, I particularly like things like that. We created a game. I'm trying to think of when it was. Maybe about must be almost 15 years ago. That I love. It had modest success. It's called the iTop, and we have this great patent. But it senses the Earth's magnetic field. So when you spin the top, every time it passes magnetic north, it registers it. So it counts rotations. So because of that, there's like a lot of games you can play. But it's physical. It's kind of a clever. It's just a clever, device, gadget. I call it more of a gadget than a toy or a game.
Maybe there's a mashup between the magnetic top and Twister. That sounds fun. How many times you have to touch yellow?
Come up with it. We'll represent it.
That's so good. Well, it's been a pleasure to hear your story. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you. Please edit a lot out. Telling a lot of stories.
No, it was time well spent. We really appreciate you sharing your journey.